Good evening, and welcome to our Ecumenical Lenten Wednesday worship series. This year, our congregations are gathering together, and each week we're hearing a service centered around the theme of perseverance, as we find ways to persevere through the challenges of this year. And also, as we find ways to persevere in our own challenges, we are encouraging each and every one of you to participate in helping others persevere through their challenges by donating gifts of winter weather gear, warm jackets, blankets, socks, tarps. Bring those to your local congregation, and your local congregation will pass those along to places like Safe Space or the Jesus Center, making sure that they get into the hands of people who are trying to persevere on the streets right here in Chico. But for tonight, I invite you to take a moment and center yourselves and enter into what we at Faith Lutheran love to do at the end of a long day, which is sing Holden evening prayer. This is a sung prayer service. And while the words will be up on the screen, the melody can be a little complex at times. So if you'd like, I encourage you to visit chicofaithlutheran.org/worshipbook. And there you can download all the musical notation to sing along as well. But also, if you'd like, just sit back and listen. And let the beauty of this music and the words I share from the scriptures inspire you and help you persevere in the coming week. Amen.
Jesus Christ, you are the light of the world, the light no darkness can overcome. Stay with us now, for it is evening,
and the day is almost over.
Let your light scatter the darkness and shine within your people here. Joyous light of heavenly glory, loving glow of God's own face, you who sing creation's story, shine on every land and race. Now as evening falls around us, we shall raise our songs to you. God of daybreak, God of shadows, come and light our hearts anew. In the stars that grace the darkness, in the blazing sun of dawn, of the light of peace and wisdom, we can hear your quiet song. Love that fills the night with wonder, love that warms a weary soul, love that bursts all chains asunder, set us free and make us whole. You who make the heavens splendor, every dancing star of night, make us shine with gentle justice, let us each reflect your light. Mighty God of all creation, gentle Christ who lights the way, loving Spirit of salvation, lead us on to endless day. May Christ be with you all,
and also with you.
Let us sing our thanks to God.
It is right to give God thanks and praise. Blessed are you, Creator of the universe. From old you have led your people by night and day. May the light of your Christ make our darkness bright. For your word and your presence are the light of our pathways, and you are the light and life of all creation. Let my prayer rise up like incense before you, the lifting up of my hands as an offering to you. O God, I call to you.
O
Come to
God,
me
I call to
now.
you.
Oh,
Come
hear
to
my
me
voice
now.
when I
Oh,
cry
hear
to
my voice
you.
when I cry to
Let
you.
my prayer rise
Let my
up
prayer
like
rise
incense
up
before
like
you,
incense
the
before
lifting
you.
up of my
The lifting
hands
up
as
of
an
my
offering
hands
to
as an offering to
you.
you.
Keep watch within me, God.
Keep
Deep in
watch
my
within
heart
me,
may the
God.
light
Deep
of
in
your
my heart
love
may
be
the light of
burning
your love be
bright.
burning
Let my prayer
bright.
rise
Let my
up
prayer
like
rise
incense
up like
before you,
incense
the lifting
before
up
you.
of my
The
hands
lifting up
as
of
an
my
offering
hands
to
as an offering to
you.
you.
All praise be to God of all,
All praise be
Creator
to
of
God
life.
of
All
all,
praise be
Creator
to
of
Christ
life.
and the
All praise
Spirit
be to
of
Christ and the
love.
Spirit of
Let my prayer
love.
rise
Let my
up
prayer
like
rise
incense
up like
before
incense
you, the
before
lifting up
you.
of my
The
hands
lifting up
as
of my
an
hands
offering to
as an offering to you.
May our prayers come before you, O God, as incense, and may your presence surround and fill us, so that in union with all creation we might sing your praise and your love in our lives. Amen. The Lord be with you. One of the greatest resources for perseverance is being able to see God's helping hand in our lives. But sometimes it's hard to see God. And so I thought perhaps we could learn a lesson from our Jewish siblings, who this past week celebrated the festival of Purim. Because Purim is a festival dedicated to seeing God in places where it might not be obvious. You see, the festival of Purim is centered around reading the book of Esther. Now, I'm not going to read to you the whole book of Esther, but I'm going to summarize it real quick, well, somewhat quickly. And as I do so, as I tell you the story of Esther, I want to encourage you to notice where you see God in it. And the story goes like this. The king of Persia had a beautiful wife, and so he wanted to show her off to all the people in his court, and in the middle of a feast, he commanded that she show up in her royal outfit and display herself for the admiration of all the crowds. His queen had more respect for herself than that. She said, "No, I'm not going to objectify myself like that." And the king was upset. He wasn't used to having people say no to him, and he consulted his advisors what they should do about it, and they said, get rid of her. She shouldn't be queen. So he did. And instead, he went out and he had his servants search all the Persian Empire for a new queen. And of all the women that they could find, the one that was most pleasing to the king of Persia, both in her external beauty and her internal beauty, was a woman named Esther, who happened to be Jewish. But when she was selected to be queen, her cousin, who had adopted and raised her like a father, a man by the name of Mordecai, who was also Jewish, said to her, Esther, for now, maybe don't tell anyone you're Jewish. And so she followed his advice and became queen without telling anyone about her ethnic and religious identity. Now, as it happened, there was also the Grand Vizier of Persia, the number one advisor to the king, a man named Haman. And the king instructed that everyone in the land should bow down and pay respect to Haman when he walked by. But Mordecai would often come by the palace to check on his cousin. And when Haman would walk by, Mordecai refused to bow. He refused to bow because he felt that he should bow to no one but God. Now, this greatly upset Mordecai, and greatly upset Haman, and he struggled with what to do with it. And as he talked to his friends and family, they said, you know what you should do? You should get revenge and eliminate not just Mordecai, but all Jews, because it's because of their Jewishness, their faith, that they refuse to bow to you. So that's a great idea. So he went about thinking about how he would do so. But while he was plotting, it just so happened that Mordecai, as he was passing around the palace gates, overheard a couple of guards plotting how they were going to kill the king of Persia. Well, Mordecai reported this to the superiors. They arrested the guards. The king's life was spared from this evil plot. Now, Haman didn't know this happened. And he went to the king and said, hey, king, don't you know in your nation there are a group of people spread out among the land who just don't behave the way everyone else does, and it's really undermining your authority. Will you give me permission to destroy these people, to strengthen your rule? And Haman even said, look, I'll even toss in 10,000 silver pieces to the royal treasury if you let me do this. The king said, well, this seems very reasonable. Go ahead. Who are these folks? And Haman said, oh, well, they're the Jewish people. And the king said, fine, get rid of all of them. You kill them. Now, when Mordecai heard this, that this decree was being sent out among all the Persian Empire, it grieved him greatly, and so he went to the palace and called upon his cousin Esther and said, Esther, you have to confront the king and ask him not to do this, to change his order. And Esther, though she was now queen, said, look, I would love to help, but if anyone approaches the king, goes into his inner courts without his invitation, they are sentenced to death. And she said, the king hasn't invited me into his inner courts for over 30 days. I don't know what to do. She said, I better not get involved. Mordecai said to his cousin, he said, look, Esther, if you keep silent at such time as this, you won't be spared. Just because you're here in the palace, don't think you'll escape. He said, if you keep silent at such a time as this, help will arise for the Jewish people from another quarter, but you and your family will perish. And then he said, perhaps it is for such a time as this that you have been raised to royal dignity. And so Esther thought about what her cousin said, and she said, okay, tell all the Jews in the city to begin fasting on my behalf. And I will go and I will approach the king. Though it is against the law and though I may lose my life, I will do this for our people. And so she did. She dressed in her finest royal gown, and though she had not been invited by the king, she entered into his inner court. And when the king saw her enter unwelcomed, he smiled because he remembered how much he loved Esther. And so he welcomed her to come in, and he said, "Why have you come to visit me? What is it I can do for you? I will give you anything, even up to half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "Oh, that's very generous, but really all I would like is to have a banquet with you and your favorite advisor, Haman." And the king said, "Oh, well, of course, let me fetch him right away." And they fetched Haman, and they threw a banquet, and they had a lovely dinner. And at the end of the dinner, Haman left feeling very good about himself. But as he walked out, he looked and he saw Mordecai once again at the entrance of the palace. And once again, Mordecai refused to bow to Haman. And he went home in a rage. He said to his wife and his children, "Look, Queen Esther, she's shown me this great honor, a private banquet. She bestowed gifts on me, and I should be on top of the world. But it's all meaningless to me because this one man won't bow when I pass by. What should I do?" And his wife and his kids commiserated on this. "Oh, that sounds terrible. You know what you should do? You should build a gallows 80 feet tall right in front of the palace. And then tomorrow morning, go to the king and say, 'Hey, let me hang Mordecai from these gallows that I built.'" Haman said, "That's a great idea." And he ordered those gallows built that very night. But that very night, the king couldn't sleep. Just couldn't fall asleep. And so in the middle of the night, he ordered his servants to bring him the book of records, all the records of what had happened in the palace recently. And he just said, "Read to me. I don't care. Maybe it'll put me to sleep." And as they read to them, they read to him a passage about how that there was a man named Mordecai who had overheard the conspiracy of some guards to try to kill the king. And the king said, "Whoa, I didn't know about that. A guy named Mordecai saved my life? That's amazing. What have we done to reward him?" And the servant said, "Well, honestly, we haven't done anything to reward him." The king said, "That's not right." The king said, "Call my grand vizier right away. Call Haman, and I want to talk to him." And so he calls Haman, and Haman says, "Hey, king, what do you need?" And the king says, "Okay, Haman, here's a hypothetical for you. Say I had a really faithful servant who is super loyal to me." And Haman said, "Oh, yeah, say you did have such a faithful and loyal servant." The king says, "Yeah, okay, so imagine this guy. Now imagine I wanted to bestow the greatest honor on him possible. What would I give him?" And Haman said, "Well, king's obviously talking about me." So Haman says, "Here's what you should do, king. You should take your own robe and you should dress him in it. And then you should take your own horse and you should put him on it. And then you should take him and you should lead him through the town in a parade saying, 'This is how I treat my loyal and faithful servants.'" And the king said, "That's a great idea, Haman. You should do that for Mordecai." And Haman said, "Wait, what?" And the king said, "Yep, right now I want you to do everything you just said, and I want you to lead Mordecai through the town on my horse, wearing my robe, and you tell everyone how great he is." And Haman said, "Oh, no." But he had to do it. And then that evening, Queen Esther invited him again to a second banquet. And at this banquet, the king said once more, "Well, my queen, what can I do for you? I will give you anything, even up to half my kingdom." And Queen Esther said, "I ask for one thing. I ask for my life and the life of my people, for we have been sold into destruction." And the king said, "Wait, what?" And the queen said, "Someone has plotted to kill every single one of my people. And the king said, "Who would do this?" And Queen Esther said, "It's the guest of honor at this banquet I threw. It's Haman." And the king was outraged. And the king said, "Well, we need to banish this guy from my presence." And Haman threw himself at Queen Esther and said, "Please, no, have mercy on me." But when the king saw Haman throw himself at the queen, he said, "Look, he's even attacking my wife right here in my own home. No, this is an outrage. What can I do with this guy?" And one of his servants said, "Well, someone conveniently built an 80-foot tall gallows right out front of the palace. Why don't you hang him on it?" And the king said, "Good idea." And so he did. And then he brought Esther, and she introduced him to Mordecai. And the king said, "Oh, thank you for all that you have done for me." And then the king issued a decree and sent it through all the lands of Persia and their great empire, saying, "No harm shall come to the Jewish people. Let them be protected." And then he promoted Mordecai to be grand vizier in Haman's place. And then Mordecai sent out a letter to all the people living in the Persian Empire saying, "Once a year, let us have a festival to celebrate these events. And let us call it Purim," which means casting of lots, because Haman cast his lots against us, but they have turned for us. So that's the story of Esther. Now, I asked you before I told you that story, look for God in the story. Did you see God somewhere? Here's a fun fact. Never once in the entire book of Esther is God's name mentioned. Not once. And so when the rabbis were deciding what books to include in the Torah, they debated about whether or not this should be included in the sacred scriptures of the Bible. And they said, God's never mentioned, not even once. But the other rabbis said, God's name is never mentioned. But God is present in every twist and turn in this story. God is pulling the strings to save God's people. God is everywhere in this story. God's just wearing a disguise. And so they decided to include the book of Esther in the Bible, because the book of Esther teaches us to find God where it's not obvious that God is present. And in the festival of Purim, they have a whole set of traditions to help us do this. The first is that, and this is what it says in Mordecai's letter at the end of the book of Esther, it says that every Jewish person is required to send food gifts to other people's homes and to give gifts to the poor. Now, in some passages in scriptures where it has requirements of people to do things, it makes exceptions for people who are hard up, who don't have a lot of financial means. You know, well, if you can't afford a sheep for Passover, a lamb for Passover, you can share one with the family next door, something like that. Not in this instance. It says every single person, no matter how much money they have or how little money they have to give food to someone else, send it to someone else's house. They have to give a gift to someone who is not well off. And the idea behind that is to say, look, every single person has something that they can do on God's behalf, some way that God can work through them to help God's people. Even if they think they have nothing. Queen Esther said, I can't help my people. If I approach the king without his summons, he'll kill me. And yet she realized that she could do something. She could take a risk. That God had perhaps placed her there for such a time as this. And so that's the first thing, is to say, Jewish people go and they give gifts of food, they mail them off, and they give financial gifts to charities and objects, presents to people who have not a lot of money. But while they do this, they dress up in costumes. It's like carnival for Jewish folks. And if you go into Orthodox neighborhoods, you'll see on Purim people walking around like Big Bird with the big fur hats on, and you'll see people dressed up as Spider-Man with the curly hair coming out of the sideburns. And the reason they dress up in all these costumes is they do it they dress up in costumes while they're giving away the money, while they're sending out the food, because they want the people who receive these gifts to look for God underneath the costume that the person is wearing. So that instead of seeing Ben or Mordecai or Esther, the people who receive these gifts see God. They see God underneath the mask at work in all these everyday actions. And the final thing that they do to celebrate Purim is to have a feast. They're supposed to eat and drink to the point where they're so full and maybe intoxicated that they can't tell Mordecai from Haman. They can't tell the good from the bad. Now, some more sober-minded rabbis have said, look, it's not about getting plastered. It's about eating your fill, maybe having a little something to drink with it, and then falling asleep. Because when you're asleep, then you can't tell the good from the bad. You can't tell Mordecai from Haman. So that's a better way to do it. But to say, why? Why do that at all? And the idea is, we can spend so much of our life being hyper-vigilant, always on the watch for danger, always trying to discern, is this thing good, is this thing bad? That we become overwhelmed. And we lose sight of the fact that it is God who will guide us through all this. And so the Jewish people, who have known in every generation the danger that surrounds them as a minority, they take one day a year where they say, you know what? We're just going to let down our guard. We're just going to relax and have fun. We're not going to worry about doing absolutely everything to figure out what's going to help us or what's going to hurt us. We're just going to trust God. And for one night, it'll be enough. And so I commend these things to you, these practices. The first is to remember that there is always something you can do to help. That indeed, God may have placed you in this time and place for a purpose for such a time as this. You may be here. And the second is to say, let us remember to look for God behind the masks, especially in this time when everyone we see is wearing a mask. To say, perhaps that is God underneath there, who is helping you in this very moment in ways you don't even expect or understand. And finally, remember to rest. Remember to let loose and have fun. To take a moment and just enjoy the life that God has given you, remembering that it doesn't all depend on you, that God will guide us through. Amen.
An angel went from God to a town called Nazareth, to a woman whose name was Mary.
The angel said to her, rejoice, O highly favored, for God is with you. You shall bear a child, and his name shall be Jesus, the chosen one of God Most High. And Mary said, I am the servant of my God. I live to do your will. My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you. You have looked with love on your servant here, and blessed me all my life through. Great and mighty are you, promised to Sarah and Abraham kindness forevermore. My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you. You have looked with love on your servant here, and blessed me all my life through. Watch, O Lord, with all those awake this night. Watch, O Lord, with all those who sleep. Give your angels and saints charge over all who sleep.
Tend your ailing ones
In your love, Lord,
rest your weary ones
in your love, Lord,
bless your dying ones
in your love, O Lord of all. Watch, O Lord, with all those awake this night. Watch, O Lord, with all those who weep. Give your angels and saints charge over all who sleep. Soothe your suffering ones in your love, Lord. Hear afflicted ones in your love, Lord. Shield your joyous ones in your love, O Lord of all. Watch, O Lord, with all those awake this night. Watch, O Lord, with all those who weep. Give your angels and saints charge over all who sleep.
Hold your grieving ones
In your love, Lord,
raise your fallen ones
in your love, Lord,
mend your broken ones
in your love, O Lord of all. Watch, O Lord, with all those awake this night. Watch, O Lord, with all those who weep. Give your angels and saints charge over all who sleep. Guard your little ones in your love, Lord. Guide your searching ones in your love, Lord. Grant us all your peace in your love, O Lord of all. Watch, O Lord, with all those awake this night. Watch, O Lord, with all those who weep. Give your angels and saints charge over all who sleep.
I invite you to pray with me the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Let us bless our God.
Praise and thanks to you. May God, Creator, bless us and keep us. May Christ be ever light for our lives. May the Spirit
Go in peace. May God give you strength to persevere. Amen.